Elderly black maid shamed at the bank. The Mafia boss was right there. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Clara Williams was no stranger to hard work. At 65 years old, she had spent decades cleaning the luxurious homes of Chicago's wealthiest families. Her hands, once strong and capable, had grown worn and calloused, her back sore from years of scrubbing floors and polishing countertops. But Clara was proud of the life she had built, even if it was humble. She had always kept her head down, silently enduring the insults and condescension of the wealthy families she served. To them, she was nothing more than a maid, someone who existed to make their lives easier. Today, Clara was at the bank, hoping to deposit the savings she had carefully tucked away for years. It wasn't much, but it was enough to pay for her bills and keep her little apartment in working order. She had waited in line patiently, clutching the envelope filled with cash, each bill a reminder of her years of sacrifice. As she approached the counter, the young teller looked at her with an air of disdain, his eyes narrowing when he saw the wrinkled bills she was holding. "What is this?" the teller asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You bring cash like this? You know how much paperwork this requires, right?" Clara's face flushed, but she stayed silent. She knew how it would go. She had been humiliated before by people like him, young, entitled, looking down on her for simply doing her job. The teller began to count the bills slowly, deliberately making a show of the process, as if he had all the time in the world to make her feel small. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. Clara stood there, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. She had worked so hard for this money, and yet here she was, being treated like a criminal. The embarrassment was suffocating, but she kept her head down. The teller, clearly enjoying his moment of power, looked at her account details and sneered. "I see you're just a maid. How exactly did you come by all this money?" Clara's chest tightened. The sting of his words hit harder than anything physical. She had heard it all before, the insults, the looks, the judgment. But it still hurt. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. That's when the door to the bank opened, and in walked a man who commanded attention with every step. Dominic Romano, a name that struck fear into the hearts of everyone who knew it. He was a mafia boss, the head of one of the most powerful crime families in the city. As he entered, the atmosphere in the room shifted. His dark eyes scanned the bank with the precision of a predator, and when they landed on Clara, something shifted in his expression. He had been here for business, but now, his gaze was fixed on her, and he saw everything. He saw the injustice, the humiliation. Without a word, he walked toward the counter, his presence like a storm. The teller froze, his hands still on the cash, as if he realized too late that he had crossed a line. Dominic's voice was low, but it carried across the room like a thunderclap. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone laced with authority. The teller stammered, looking from Dominic to Clara and back again. I was just processing her deposit, but you've made her wait, humiliated her, and now you're questioning her integrity?" Dominic's eyes were cold, but there was a fire behind them. "You don't treat people like that. Not here. Not on my watch." The room went silent. The teller stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Dominic turned to Clara, his gaze softening for just a moment. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for the way you were treated. This is on me," he said, his voice firm but respectful. Clara, stunned by the turn of events, could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had expected nothing but more disdain, but here was this man, a stranger, standing up for her, a woman who had spent her whole life invisible to the world around her. As the bank staff scrambled to process the deposit, Dominic gave Clara a nod, a small but meaningful gesture that spoke volumes. She wasn't invisible anymore. Clara stood there, still in shock, as the bank employees quickly processed her deposit, their faces a mix of embarrassment and reluctance. The man who had come to her defense, Dominic Romano, watched them closely, his presence undeniable. He was the kind of man who could make the air in the room feel thick with his authority, yet he didn't demand attention. It was simply there, woven into every part of his demeanor. Clara, still clutching her envelope, couldn't quite wrap her head around what had just happened. She had never imagined that someone like him would stand up for her, a woman who had spent her entire life in the background, invisible to the world around her. "I didn't mean to cause a scene," Clara murmured, her voice soft, still unsure of what to make of Dominic's intervention. He turned his head slightly, his gaze sharp, but not unkind. "Sometimes, the right thing to do causes a scene," he said quietly. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Clara could have sworn she saw a flicker of something beneath his cold exterior, a hint of understanding, maybe even a trace of empathy. "You've had enough of being treated like you're invisible, haven't you?" he added, his tone softer now. Clara blinked, surprised at how easily he seemed to see through her. She had spent years learning to hide her emotions, to fade into the background and avoid attention. It was safer that way. But Dominic's words, so simple and yet so accurate, hit her harder than anything else that day. "I just want to live in peace," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic nodded slowly, as if he understood exactly what she meant. The deposit was quickly completed, and Clara stepped away from the counter, still processing the surreal moment. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadying slightly. "You didn't have to do that." Dominic watched her for a moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "You deserved better," he said, his gaze shifting to the bank employees who had averted their eyes, too ashamed to meet his. "And I don't tolerate people being mistreated, especially not for things they can't control." With that, he turned to leave. As Clara stood there, she couldn't help but feel a small spark of hope flicker in her chest. She had spent so many years thinking she would never be seen, never be more than a servant in the eyes of the world. But Dominic Romano had seen her. He had given her a moment of dignity when she had none left. The weight of the world seemed a little lighter in that moment. And even though she knew her life wouldn't change overnight, she felt a glimmer of possibility. Perhaps, for the first time in years, she wasn't invisible anymore. Clara left the bank that day with a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of dignity. As she walked down the street, the bustling sounds of the city seemed to fade into the background. She had always kept to herself, never daring to hope for more. Her life had been one of quiet service, always in the background, always unnoticed. But something about Dominic Romano's intervention had stirred something inside her. She felt seen, for the first time in a long time. That evening, Clara returned to her small apartment, a modest place with peeling paint and worn furniture. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She sat down on the worn couch, still reflecting on the events of the day. What had happened at the bank didn't feel real. She had been embarrassed, humiliated in front of strangers, but then, in an instant, everything had changed. Dominic had stepped in, not out of obligation, but out of some sense of fairness or justice. She had never expected someone like him to care about her, a woman whose entire life had been spent in the service of others. And yet, he had. Clara found herself thinking about him more than she cared to admit. Dominic Romano, the Mafia boss, a man who commanded respect and fear in equal measure, had shown her kindness. It was an impossible thought, one that didn't fit with the life she had known. The next few days passed quietly for Clara. She returned to her routine, cleaning and caring for the household she worked for. But her mind often drifted back to Dominic. His words, the way he had stood up for her, stayed with her. It was a reminder that there was more to life than just surviving. That day at the bank had planted a seed in her, a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, her life could be different. She didn't know what it meant yet, but something was shifting inside her. As the days turned into weeks, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was meant for something more than what she had known. Her work, though important, had always been an invisible role. She had always been the one who cleaned up after others, the one who went unnoticed. But now, in the quiet moments, she wondered if that could change. One evening, as she was finishing up a long day of work, Clara received a call. The voice on the other end was familiar, though she hadn't expected to hear it again. "Clara," Dominic's voice came through the phone, calm and steady. "I know this might seem sudden, but I need someone I can trust. There's a position opening, and I think you might be the right fit." Clara's heart raced. She didn't know what to say. Dominic had said he would help her, but this was something entirely different. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "I don't have experience in anything other than cleaning." Dominic chuckled softly. You'd be surprised what skills you already have, Clara. Trust me, I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe in you. Clara was silent for a moment, processing the weight of his words. This was more than just a job offer. This was an opportunity, something she had never thought would be within her reach. She had always worked hard, but she had never had a chance to move beyond her role. Dominic's offer was a chance at something more, something different. I'll think about it, Clara finally said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions she was feeling. Take your time, Dominic replied. But remember, opportunities like this don't come around often. And when they do, you have to grab them. The conversation ended, but Clara stood there for a long time, staring at the phone in her hand. Her life had been defined by hard work and quiet sacrifice. But now, for the first time, she had the chance to define her own future. Clara couldn't stop thinking about Dominic's offer. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw herself standing in front of the bank counter, feeling small and unseen, only to be lifted by Dominic's unexpected kindness. But now, he was offering her a chance at something more than the quiet life she had known. The phone call echoed in her mind as she sat in her small, dimly lit apartment. Her fingers rested on the edge of the kitchen table, the phone still clutched in her hand. What was she supposed to do with this opportunity? She had always been content with her role, always been invisible, always worked hard but never asked for more. And yet, now, she was being offered a chance to change that, to leave behind the familiar routine and step into the unknown. Clara had spent her life cleaning homes for others, watching from the sidelines as people much wealthier than her made decisions that shaped their world. She had never questioned her place in that world. It was how things were, how they had always been. But Dominic had seen something in her that she hadn't even seen in herself. He had believed in her when no one else had. She had to admit, it was tempting. But could she really do it? Could she step out of the shadows and take control of her life for the first time? It was one thing to think about it, and quite another to actually do it. The next morning, Clara woke early, the decision weighing heavily on her mind. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator in the corner. She went through her usual routine, making coffee and tidying up the small space, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Dominic and his offer. She had never imagined a life beyond the one she had lived for so long. But now, the possibility of something new seemed so close, she could almost reach out and touch it. By mid-morning, Clara had made up her mind. She picked up the phone and dialed Dominic's number, her heart pounding in her chest. It only rang once before he answered. "Clara," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "Have you thought it over?" Clara took a deep breath, feeling a surge of courage rise within her. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I've thought about it, and I'm ready." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Dominic spoke again, his voice warm with approval. "Good. I knew you would be." He paused, then added, "I'll send someone to meet you tomorrow. We'll get everything sorted out. You'll be working directly with me." Clara's heart skipped a beat. Working with Dominic, the man who had changed everything for her in a single moment. The weight of the decision she had just made settled in her chest, but for the first time in years, she felt a spark of excitement. She was taking a step into the unknown, and it terrified her. But she was ready. The next day, a car pulled up outside Clara's apartment, a sleek black vehicle that seemed completely out of place on her quiet street. A man in a suit stepped out, his expression serious but polite as he approached the door. Clara opened it slowly, her nerves creeping up as she took in the sight of the driver. He was here to take her to Dominic. This was real. Her heart raced as she followed the man outside and into the car. The ride to the Romano estate felt like an eternity. The city passed by in a blur, but Clara could barely focus on the passing scenery. Her mind was consumed with the thought of what was to come. The car finally came to a stop in front of a grand, imposing building. Clara stepped out, taking in the sight of the estate in awe. It was nothing like the small, modest apartment she had known all her life. The mansion in front of her was a world away from everything she had ever imagined for herself. As she walked up the steps and into the building, she couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. This was her new reality. She was no longer the invisible maid. She was stepping into a world that, until recently, had seemed so far out of reach. Dominic Romano was waiting inside, his presence as commanding as ever. Clara took a deep breath before walking toward him. This was her chance. This was her moment to prove to herself that she was more than the sum of her years of service. She was ready to embrace the future, whatever it might bring. Clara stepped into the Romano estate, her heart pounding in her chest. The grandeur of the mansion was overwhelming, each room more extravagant than the last. She had never imagined herself in a place like this, a far cry from the small apartment she had called home for so many years. The walls were lined with expensive art, the furniture elegant and imposing, and the air smelled of fresh flowers and polished wood. The man who had opened the door for her led her down a long hallway, and Clara could feel her nerves creeping up again. She was about to meet Dominic, the man who had changed everything for her. She still couldn't believe it. It had only been a few days since he had offered her the opportunity, and now she was here, walking through a world that felt so far removed from the life she had known. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the marble-floored hall as they approached a large, ornate door. The man knocked once before opening it, and Clara stepped inside. Dominic was sitting behind a large wooden desk, his back straight, his eyes focused on some papers in front of him. When he looked up, his gaze softened slightly, though his expression remained as controlled as ever. "Clara," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm glad you made it." Clara gave a small nod, still unsure of what to say. She had expected to feel out of place, but now that she was here, she couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose settling over her. "Thank you for this opportunity," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Dominic studied her for a moment, then motioned for her to sit. "You've worked hard for a long time. Now it's time to see what you can do when you're given the chance to step up." Clara sat down in the chair across from him, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She had no idea what this new role would entail, but she was ready to find out. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his gaze still fixed on her. "There are a few things you need to know," he said. "You'll be working closely with me, and that means you'll have to learn quickly. There's no room for mistakes. But I believe you have the potential to do more than just clean. I've seen it in you." Clara felt a rush of warmth at his words, though she tried to hide it. She had always been told she wasn't good enough for anything more than what she was doing. But here was Dominic, a man who controlled entire empires, telling her that she had potential. It was a strange feeling, one she wasn't used to, but one she was beginning to accept. "I'll do my best," she said, the words coming out with more confidence than she felt. Dominic gave a small smile, the first she had seen from him. "I know you will." He stood up and walked around the desk, his eyes never leaving hers. "The first task will be to help me with some of the more delicate matters. You'll be responsible for managing a few key details, keeping track of important information, and making sure things run smoothly. It's not easy work, but I'm confident you're capable." Clara nodded, taking in every word. This was her chance to prove herself, not just to Dominic, but to herself. She had always played it safe, never daring to aim higher, but now she was being given a shot at something bigger. "I won't let you down," she said, feeling a sense of determination welling up inside her. Dominic studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good. I expect nothing less." As the meeting ended, Clara walked out of the room, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was in control of her own destiny. She had stepped into a world that was foreign to her, but she was ready to take on whatever came next. She was no longer just the invisible maid. She was someone who had a chance to make a real difference. Clara settled into her new routine at the Romano estate, each day presenting new challenges and opportunities. She had never imagined herself in this position, working side by side with one of the most powerful men in the city. At first, it felt like she was playing a part in someone else's life, like she was just pretending to belong. But as the days passed, she began to realize that this was her life now. She was no longer just the invisible maid. Dominic had made sure she had a purpose, a real job that mattered. Her responsibilities were varied, handling sensitive documents, managing schedules, ensuring the household ran smoothly. It was hard work, but it felt different than anything she had done before. There was a sense of pride in what she was accomplishing, even if the tasks seemed small to others. She felt seen, valued, and that was something she had never experienced before. Dominic's expectations were high, but he wasn't unreasonable. He had given her room to learn and grow, and he never hesitated to offer guidance when needed. His presence, once so intimidating, had become a source of motivation for her. He had believed in her from the start, and now it was up to her to prove that his faith was not misplaced. As the weeks went by, Clara's confidence grew. She became more comfortable in her role, learning the ins and outs of the estate and the people who worked there. She had a few setbacks along the way, small mistakes, moments of doubt, but each time, Dominic was there to remind her that she was doing just fine. "You're doing well, Clara," he would say with that calm, reassuring tone. "Don't let small mistakes distract you. You're here for a reason." Those words had become her anchor, a reminder that she had earned her place here. It wasn't always easy, but Clara was starting to feel like she belonged. One afternoon, as Clara was finishing up her duties, Dominic called her into his office. The invitation wasn't unusual. He often asked her to handle various tasks or join him for brief discussions. But today, there was something different in his voice, a hint of something that made Clara pause. She walked into the office, her heart beating a little faster than usual. Dominic was sitting at his desk, his eyes focused on a set of papers in front of him. He looked up when she entered, his gaze steady but thoughtful. "Clara," he said, his voice carrying a weight of seriousness she hadn't heard before. "I've been thinking about your progress." Clara held her breath, unsure of what to expect. "You've done well here. You've proven that you're capable, reliable, and efficient. I've seen your dedication, and it hasn't gone unnoticed." Clara couldn't help but smile at the praise. It felt good to hear it, especially from someone like Dominic. But there was something else in his tone, something that told her there was more coming. "I want to offer you something more," he continued. "A position of even greater responsibility." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as he regarded her. "I want you to take on a more important role within the family's operations. It will involve managing a team, handling critical tasks that affect the business. You'll be working closely with me on some of our most important dealings. It's not an easy job, but I believe you're ready for it." Clara's mind raced. This was more than she had ever hoped for. This was a chance to prove herself even further, to step up in a way she had never imagined. But with it came a responsibility she wasn't sure she was prepared for. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that," Clara admitted, her voice hesitant. Dominic's expression softened. "You've been ready for a long time, Clara. You just didn't know it. This is your chance to show everyone, including yourself, what you're truly capable of. Take it or leave it, but I'm giving you the opportunity to step into something bigger." Clara stood there for a moment, processing everything he had said. Her heart was racing, and her mind was filled with questions. But deep down, she knew she couldn't let this chance slip by. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when everything could change. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady now, filled with determination. Dominic smiled, a rare expression that made Clara's heart swell with pride. "I knew you would." Clara settled into her new role with a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. The transition had been swift, and though it was challenging, she found herself rising to meet the expectations that Dominic had set for her. She was managing a team, overseeing crucial tasks that affected the family's operations. Her days were filled with meetings, paperwork, and constant decision-making. It was a far cry from the quiet life she had known, but it was also exactly what she had needed. The work was demanding, but Clara found herself growing into it. She had always been someone who worked hard behind the scenes, but now, she was in the spotlight in a way that was both exhilarating and intimidating. There were moments when she doubted herself, when the pressure seemed overwhelming and the weight of responsibility threatened to crush her. But every time that happened, she remembered Dominic's words. You've been ready for a long time, Clara. You just didn't know it. His faith in her had been the spark she needed, and now, she was determined not to let him down. Dominic had given her more than just a job. He had given her a chance to prove her worth. As the days went by, she found herself gaining the respect of her colleagues, many of whom had once looked down on her as nothing more than a maid. Now, she was the one they turned to for guidance, and the realization that she had earned that respect filled her with pride. One day, as Clara was reviewing some important documents in her office, Dominic walked in, his presence filling the room as it always did. She looked up, slightly startled by his sudden appearance, but quickly regained her composure. "Clara," he said, his voice steady, "I've been following your progress closely." Clara sat up straighter in her chair, unsure of what to expect. "You've done excellent work so far," he continued, his gaze never leaving her. "But there's more to be done. I want you to take on an even bigger challenge. You're ready for it." Clara's heart raced as she processed his words. A bigger challenge? She had already been given so much responsibility, and now he was asking for more. "What exactly do you need me to do?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dominic leaned against the desk, his expression thoughtful. "I want you to oversee an important negotiation. It's a delicate matter, one that involves several key players. You'll be leading the discussion, and you'll be making the decisions." Clara's mind raced. Leading a negotiation? It was a huge responsibility, and the thought of it filled her with both excitement and fear. But she knew that Dominic wouldn't have asked her if he didn't believe she could handle it. "I'll do it," she said, her voice filled with determination. Dominic nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I knew you would. You've got this, Clara." In that moment, Clara realized just how far she had come. She had gone from being an invisible maid to becoming someone who held the power to influence important decisions. It was a role she had never imagined for herself, but it was one she was ready to embrace. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Clara worked tirelessly, reviewing every detail, making sure she was fully prepared for the upcoming negotiation. She knew this was her chance to prove that she belonged in this world, a world she had once thought was beyond her reach. When the day of the negotiation finally arrived, Clara walked into the conference room with a sense of purpose. The room was filled with powerful people, all of whom looked at her with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. She could feel their eyes on her, but instead of shrinking back, she stood tall. This was her moment. She was in charge now. The negotiation went smoothly, and Clara's decisions were met with approval. She had done it. She had stepped up and handled the responsibility with grace and confidence. By the end of the day, as the last of the guests left the room, Dominic approached her, his face filled with pride. "You did well, Clara," he said. "I knew you could handle it." Clara smiled, feeling a rush of accomplishment wash over her. She had proven to herself, and to everyone else, that she was more than just a maid. She was someone who could stand on her own, someone who could make a real difference. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly proud of what she had achieved. Clara stood by the large windows of the Romano estate, gazing out at the sprawling city below. The night was calm, the lights twinkling in the distance, but Clara's mind was racing. She had come so far, and yet, there were still so many uncertainties. The negotiation had been a success, and Dominic had praised her for her handling of the situation. It had been a pivotal moment in her journey, but now the weight of everything she had achieved, and everything that was yet to come, seemed to be settling in. She had always worked behind the scenes, always been the one to clean up after others, but now she was standing at the center of it all, making decisions that affected real change. For so long, she had only dreamed of a life like this, a life where she wasn't invisible, a life where she was seen and valued. But now, it was no longer a dream. It was her reality. Dominic had given her the opportunity to prove herself, and she had done it. She had shown that she was capable, that she was more than just a maid. And now, with each new responsibility, she could feel herself growing into the role, becoming someone new, someone stronger, more confident. But as much as Clara had embraced the challenges, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the expectations that came with them. Dominic had placed his trust in her, and that trust meant something. It meant that she had to keep proving herself, day after day. It meant that there was no room for failure, no room for doubt. The pressure was constant, but Clara had learned to handle it. She had learned to trust in herself, to believe that she was worthy of this chance. And every time she succeeded, every time she made a decision that moved the family forward, she felt a little less like the person she had once been, the invisible maid, and a little more like the person she was becoming, the woman who could stand tall and face whatever came her way. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Clara was involved in everything, from meetings with key partners to overseeing the daily operations of the estate. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed, when the demands seemed impossible to meet. But there were also moments of triumph, when she could see the tangible results of her hard work. Dominic remained a constant presence, always offering guidance when needed, but also giving Clara the freedom to make her own decisions. He trusted her, and that trust was a powerful motivator. One evening, after a particularly long day, Clara found herself alone in the office. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the air conditioning. She looked at the stack of papers on her desk, a small smile playing at her lips. She had accomplished so much, but there was still so much more to do. As she sorted through the papers, she heard a soft knock at the door. It was Dominic. "Clara," he said, his tone as calm as ever. "I wanted to check in and see how you're doing." Clara looked up, surprised by the visit. "I'm doing well, thank you," she replied. "It's a lot of work, but I'm managing." Dominic nodded, his eyes scanning the room before returning to her. "I've been impressed with how you've handled everything so far," he said, his voice steady but filled with approval. "You've exceeded my expectations." Clara felt a warmth spread through her at his words. She had worked hard, but hearing that recognition from him meant more than she could express. "Thank you, Dominic," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "I wouldn't be here without your support." He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You've earned this, Clara. You've proven that you can handle anything that comes your way, and I have no doubt that you'll continue to rise to the occasion." Clara stood there for a moment, absorbing his words. In that moment, she realized just how far she had come. She had started as a woman who was overlooked, who had to fight for every little piece of respect. But now, she was someone who commanded respect, someone who had earned it. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was Clara Williams, a woman who had proven her worth, not just to others, but to herself. And as she looked at Dominic, she knew that this was just the beginning of what she could accomplish. The future was wide open, and she was ready to face it head-on. Clara stood in front of the large mirror in her room, staring at her reflection. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The woman who had once been afraid to speak up, who had kept her head down and her dreams buried deep inside. But now, she was someone else. Someone stronger. Someone with a purpose. The transformation had not been easy. It had been a journey filled with challenges, self-doubt, and moments of fear. But every step had brought her closer to the person she had always wanted to be. And it had all started with Dominic's belief in her. That one moment at the bank, when he had stepped in to protect her, had set everything in motion. She had been given a chance, and she had taken it. Now, as she looked at herself, she saw not just the maid she had once been, but a woman who had earned her place in a world that was never meant for her. The work was demanding, and the pressure was constant. But Clara had learned to rise to every occasion. She had earned the respect of her colleagues, and even Dominic had come to rely on her more and more. She was no longer just a passive participant in her own life. She was taking control. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Clara found herself in Dominic's office once again. The atmosphere was different this time, more relaxed, yet still filled with an undeniable energy. Dominic was sitting at his desk, reviewing some documents. But when he saw Clara enter, he looked up, his expression thoughtful. "Clara," he said, his voice calm. "You've come a long way." Clara smiled softly, though a part of her still couldn't quite believe how far she had come. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "I've worked hard, but I couldn't have done it without you." Dominic's gaze softened slightly. "You've proven yourself more than enough. I'm proud of what you've achieved, and I have no doubt you'll continue to do great things." Clara felt a swell of pride at his words. It meant more than he could know. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," she said, her voice firm with confidence. Dominic nodded. "I know you are. But remember, this is just the beginning. You've built something solid, but you have to keep pushing, keep striving for more. Don't ever stop." Clara absorbed his words, knowing they were true. There was always more to achieve, more to learn, and more to give. But now, she didn't fear the future. She embraced it. As she left the office, Clara's mind wandered to all that she had accomplished and all that lay ahead. She was no longer the woman who had quietly cleaned homes for the wealthy. She was now a key player in an empire, someone whose decisions mattered. And while she had no idea what the future would bring, she knew she was ready to face it head-on. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, Clara felt certain of one thing. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Her journey had only just begun,